Hey, AP Lang students, this is Kevin Steinhauser at Fiveable, and I'm excited to work with you continuing tonight through our rhetorical analysis mini unit to start the year on the Fiveable platform, really tackling rhetorical analysis and all of its intricacies. So we're going to get right started tonight, but real quick, I wanted to make sure if you're not already a member of Fiveable, please subscribe or become a member today or tomorrow. On November 1st, prices will go up, and you're here. We definitely want you guys a part of this process all year long, shooting for that 5 in your AP classes and definitely in AP Lang and Comp. So tonight we're going to look at rhetorical analysis body paragraphs. Again, this is intended to be a multi-part series in which you're walking along the right way, working on rhetorical analysis. Next week will be our last rhetorical analysis live session, and then we will switch gears in November, the rest of November, in argumentation. So I'm excited to kind of get to the meat of the matter here tonight. So let's jump into the PowerPoint and let's just get rolling with it. So tonight, make sure we're good to go here. I call this Get into the Audience's Head. Why I focus so much on that, and some teachers agree with me, some don't, but why I focus so much on getting into the audience's head is because that is what rhetorical analysis is all about. You're going to hear it phrased different ways depending on the teacher that you talk to, and they're all getting at the same thing. I like to just keep the audience at the forefront because that's going to open doors to higher levels of analysis. So next week, what we'll work on is kind of a writing skill. Once we build a really good foundation, then at the higher level scores, really look at what is, not just what is said, but how is it said. So today we're talking about the what, and I'll give you some model sentences and a model paragraph tonight, and it definitely is effective writing. But next week we're going all in on embedding quotes, which is a really important and effective writing style, especially for rhetorical analysis. So I wanted to end there. I'm kind of going above and beyond just the content before we shift gears in 2 weeks in argumentation. All right, so if you haven't seen all 4 of these live sessions, this is actually our 5th rhetorical analysis, if you count the first one, reading with an analytical mind. I do encourage you to go back, and honestly throughout the year, if you have a big rhetorical analysis essay coming up, go back, skip around, like see the parts of these. After tonight, we'll have 5 hours of rhetorical analysis review. So see the parts that are most effective for you. So first we looked at reading with an analytical mind. You have to think like a college student before you can write like a college student. And that was my big focus there. As I'm reading, am I keeping the speaker, audience, and subject all in my mind, looking at it the right way? Second, are we identifying the overall purpose? So that clearly ties into just reading at a high level. Third, and this is where we really start to set ourselves up from everyone else in the country, identifying what is worth talking about or what is worth writing about. I just say this is not a matching game. This is what sets so many students apart. I've said in the past, I'm an AP reader. I go down to a different city wherever they fly us to grade thousands of essays that come in for AP Language and Composition. Every year I grade over 1,000 essays, and every year most people are not doing step 3. The higher level papers, what separates average from great, are identifying what is worth writing about. Not just the first thing that you see, but the most important thing that you see. And that's why I focus on audience so much, because it's not what impacts me, it's not what impacts you, it's the most effective writing choices the writer makes to impact his or her audience. And that's what step 3 here is all about. Last week we talked about writing effective introduction paragraphs. Please go back and look at that if you haven't seen it already. But we're going to launch into body paragraphs today. The body paragraphs, you know this, you've known it since middle school, are the most important part of your essay, and therefore where you should be spending most of your time. I break it down to there's 2 functions of the body paragraphs. First, they show that you are highly comprehending the nuance of the text. So that's my bullet point number 1. You are getting the intricacies of it. It is very obvious, and this is coming from me, someone who's read, honestly, throughout the years in my own classroom. I talk to other teachers and I see some of their students writing, and just being an official AP reader, thousands of essays, it is very evident when a student is partially in control of comprehension. So you want to make sure by talking about the things that are most worthy of being talked about, you are showing you comprehend the text at a high level. When you start picking and choosing in your body paragraphs little strategies in isolation, like let me talk about a random metaphor in line 5 or paragraph 2, that's when you start to slip control away. It's not evident if you're just picking and choosing arbitrarily, like the small things that you feel comfortable talking about, when there's much more important things happening that you're ignoring. That's just showing me as a reader, or whoever your reader is, you don't have a high enough level of the text because you're just picking and choosing what you are in control of, or what you feel like you can control. And that goes right into number 2. It demonstrates that you are in control of the analytical task, which is clearly the more important piece here. But you can't analyze at a high level unless you comprehend at a high level. So they're very intertwined. By discussing the most important and effective writing choices, you are in charge of the analytical task. The analytical task, no matter what the wording is at the top of the page, is always going to basically ask you this. How does the author get his audience to believe what he or she wants them to believe? That is it. How do they confirm or change a mindset? Having a nuanced view is certainly important. So you have to get into the audience's head. That's the analytical task, because the speech or the essay or whatever the work is was delivered with a certain audience in mind. So I want you to always, I focused on that for 5 weeks now, always keep the audience at the forefront. Going back to the rhetorical triangle, what I really want you to focus on is the audience's relationship with the subject. The audience, before reading the work, has ideas about the subject, whatever the subject is. The speaker's job is to move the audience however necessary to change their mindset on the subject, or to concrete or cement their mindset on the subject. Here's how I really want to break it down today. Here's the audience-subject relationship. The first thing you have to consider as you're reading, and even before you're reading, what does the audience probably believe before reading? And then simply put, how does the author carefully consider the audience's projected beliefs? You have to get in the author's head and the audience's head here, right? In order to reinforce a belief or change a mindset. It might be a little bit of both, right? So just keeping in mind, I can't analyze with how the author's trying to change their mindset if I'm not thinking about what the audience is thinking before reading the work. So that's the shift that honestly most students don't do. Most students do not do a really successful before and after effect. Most people just talk about the after, but it's not as powerful if you're not also considering the before. Again, get into the author's head, get into the audience's head. It's all mind games here. That's how I want you viewing your body paragraphs. Don't spend a lot of time quoting. Don't spend a lot of time summarizing, obviously. Spend your time getting into the audience's head, getting into the author's head. How is the author trying to move an audience? I want to take just a couple minutes tonight, because we're almost done with our rhetorical analysis unit, to talk about the practical reality of timing. You have 40 minutes on average to read these, or to write these 3 essays. Again, your 3 essays are synthesis, argumentation, rhetorical analysis. For our purposes, we're doing rhetorical analysis first. In a couple of weeks, we're shifting to argumentation, and then when it gets closer to exam, we're going to shift to synthesis. You should feel fully prepared if you're with me all year going through this, and then obviously putting in a lot of good work in your classroom. 40 minutes per essay is super tough. Now, you might make a plan of like, hey, I'll spend 50 minutes on synthesis, because there's bonus reading time at the beginning. Well, I'll talk about that when we get into the synthesis unit of how to best use that. So really, you've got 15 minutes of reading prep time, and then 40, 40, 40 for these essays. Rhetorical analysis often takes the longest because you have to read a full work, or a big excerpt of a work from a work. Here's what I actually recommend. I think you can write a lot, and you might steal minutes from synthesis and put maybe 45 minutes here because of the synthesis reading time. But I'm going to plan out my recommended time, and I'll show you here in the next couple slides, assuming you want to spend 40 minutes on rhetorical analysis. And if I'm not being thorough enough, feel free to shoot me a question, or just follow up with your teacher of what's working best for you in the classroom. But practice timed essay writing several times just to get a good sense of what your timing strategy should be. I'm going to say here's one really possible and effective way to map out your time, but it's really important that you play around with this and figure out where is your time best spent as an individual. What I definitely don't want, because the problem that I see so often, is this slide right here. Not spending enough time in the text. Not spending enough time because you want to get to the writing. You're so anxious, and that's all appropriate. Like you should be like, I want to get to the writing. But only get to your own writing once you have a nuanced comprehension of the text. So I recommend spending the first 12 full solid minutes comprehending the text, understanding the pieces of it and how they fit together. Keep the audience in mind, and then you're starting to narrow down what's worth writing about. What's the writer's most effective writing choices to try to move the intended audience. 12 solid minutes. Now clearly that only leaves us 28, right? So we've got a lot of quick writing to do, but none of that writing is going to be as effective as it would be if I don't spend the time here. So I have to spend the time up front. The writing should go quicker if I take 12 minutes to comprehend the text at a high level and to identify what's worth writing about. My live session from 2-3 weeks ago. Once you've done that, 6 minutes for an intro. That might be longer than a lot of teachers recommend. I justified that last week, spending a whole hour pretty much looking at effective introduction paragraphs. So the tension here is cranking out the quality writing that I know you can do in a very constrained time setting. So in an ideal world, we're writing the best intro we can in 6 minutes. Then we got to cut our losses and move on. We can't spend more than 6-7 minutes on the intro because we do have to spend the bulk of our writing time in the body paragraphs. That's what the live session is about today. This is a very, very important live session to walk through and probably come back to throughout the year. So 6 minutes on intro. Keep practicing your time as you practice those this year. Now that moves us to 18 minutes that I recommend. And some of you might say, hey, I'm just not quite fast enough. I've got to do more, so I've got to steal time from somewhere. This is just my recommended time, remember. Something at least as a starting reference for you. 2 or 3 body paragraphs. I emphasize to my students every year, quality over quantity. This does not have to be a 5-paragraph essay that so many of you were taught since middle school, right? And so many AP essays still are 5 paragraphs. It just doesn't have to be. I would much prefer you to have 2 awesome, thorough, beautiful body paragraphs like we'll look at tonight than 3 that are rushed just to have 3. So a lot of my students start the year with 2, just trying to get to 3 at some point. A lot of my students, if I'm being honest, every year take the test in May and still are only at 2 body paragraphs. And that's just fine. Quality over quantity. Now you want more than 1 body paragraph because you do want to see, like, you want to have a good sense of organization and logical thought. I think 3 is ideal, but that's from the ideal of 3 beautiful, awesome, thorough body paragraphs. So 2 awesome body paragraphs are better than 3 mediocre ones. As you're doing that, it's 2 or 3, and honestly, most students should probably be starting the year at 2 body paragraphs. And until you're kicking butt and writing 2 beautiful body paragraphs, that's what I want you focusing on. But either way, if you're organizing 2 or 3 body paragraphs, consider how you're organizing the essay. I'm going to tell you how I recommend my students and do it. It does depend on the prompt, but moving from beginning, middle, and end. So you'll hear me talk about that tonight. That is not a required way to organize. I think that's an effective way to organize, and I think it's a pretty easy way just to say beginning, middle, and end. That's an easy way to organize. So whatever it is, you should be intentional. It should not just be, okay, this is what I identify first. I'm going to write about it first. Where are you starting in terms of your body paragraphs? Where are you ending? They should build upon each other. And I'll show you what I mean by that when I get to my sample writing tonight. I recommend doing 2 minutes on a conclusion. I've met teachers who argue with me and say, and obviously in a healthy way, but say, hey, I don't even teach my students to write a conclusion because I need to spend their time in the body paragraphs. And I essentially agree. As a reader, I know that we've talked about this a lot, like at the reading tables, as we're like, hey, should they lose points for not having conclusion or not? And honestly, there's no easy answer to that. I recommend my students, so I recommend to you, take 2 minutes to quickly rehash the rhetorical situation, talk about the audience, subject, speaker, and then it's just providing a sense of closure for your essay. So like final rhetorical thoughts here. I'm not going to spend a whole live session on it at this point in the year. It's 2 minutes of your 40. Just make sure you're taking a few sentences there at the end. Even if it's 2-3 sentences, it's providing a sense of closure. Now, an ineffective conclusion simply like restates a thesis and that's it, right? So many teachers say, I don't do that because like you are kind of wasting time at that point. So kind of broaden it out. And again, just experiment this year. We're not going to do a live session yet because I want to get to argumentation for sure and go through the ropes with that. But something I definitely am considering is what an effective conclusion looks like and how we can make that happen. So with that said, at this point in the year, if this isn't your strong suit, don't stress about it, but include it in there. And it's something like once you've mastered intro and body paragraph, we can talk about, and you can talk with your teacher, or you can reach out to me on what an effective conclusion actually practically looks like. I just want to say 2 minutes, move on. I actually do recommend spending the final 2 minutes, take a breath before you move on to the next essay. Most of you will do it in order: synthesis, rhetorical analysis, argumentation. So whatever essay, I recommend before you move on, go back quickly, read every word, or at least do a quick skim looking for grammar mistakes, spelling errors. You just want to clean it up, capitalization errors, stuff like that. You just want to be professional. You don't want your reader wondering like, hey, why is this so unpolished? Now we're trained as readers not to look for like errors. Like we're looking for like to reward you for what you're doing well. But let's be honest. At the same time, if there's multiple errors, it will affect the score. So I'm talking at the end about writing style. I'm talking next week at the end of our unit here about writing style. But that's certainly a big piece of it. Is just, are you doing the things right? Are you spelling correctly? Are you capitalizing when appropriate? Are you using sentence fluency? Which is my next point really quickly. Sentence fluency is just, does one sentence flow to the next? That is hard to edit in 2 minutes. So I recommend going and just seeing if there's anything you can change quickly. But just get used to doing it right the first way and just checking yourself. Does one sentence flow into the next? You won't have ample time to make significant revisions. So proofread is really the majority of those 2 minutes, right? You're just double checking, do I feel good about my work? And some of you might say, hey, I don't have time for that. Totally get that. My recommendation, though, is sneak in proofreading minutes. My stronger recommendation, though, like so there's tension here, is do it right the first time to the best of your ability, because you're not going to save yourself too much in proofreading. It's just cleaning up, maybe just solidifying your score. Proofreading is not going to really raise your score, right? It's just going to make sure you don't lower it with some errors. All right, so in summary, here's my potential writing plan. First 12 minutes, and this is just for rhetorical analysis. 12 minutes. This is the most important step. Read the text, plan out your essay. If you rush that, the rest is going to fall short. So once you've done that, 6 minutes of an intro. The next, the biggest chunk of time is the biggest intentionally, the most important chunk. Once you've done the first step, which I just said is the most important, is 18 minutes. So you can't do the 18 minutes effectively if you don't do the 12 minutes. So assuming you've done that well, you got to spend the majority of your time in your 2 to 3 body paragraphs. I'll show you what that looks like here in just a minute. Quickly, you write a conclusion, quickly proofread, and revise. All right. There are many ways to organize your analysis. I'm going to show you the way that I would do it. Please hear me out. Take the pieces that I'm giving you. Some of you might be like, yeah, I'm going to print off this slide and like really use it as a model. I give this as a model to every one of my students every year. So that's a total legitimate thing to do. Or you might be like, hey, I actually feel okay about it, but hear me out. Your analysis must always do these 3 things. They have to be the driving point of your essay. You can't spend a lot of time summarizing. Drive your essay through your own analytical thoughts. And again, I keep saying this, consider the most significant writing choices. What are you doing as a reader to identify that? So you're looking for, again, keeping the audience in mind. So these last 2 bullet points are super intertwined. How will the audience think and respond to this essay or this speech, the most important or impactful things and the trends over time, that's what I'm identifying as being worth talking about or writing about. All right, let's launch into effective the rest of the night body paragraphs. So the first step, and I'm only going to give you 3 steps, and then I'll show you like step 2 is the thorough one. I'm going to show you a lot about how that looks. But the first step, the first sentence of your body paragraph, so many students get away from this actually. These are so important because it's grounding yourself. Clearly state the author's most important strategy. And then again, I'm recommending that you organize your essay through beginning, middle, and end. Now, granted, if you have 2 body paragraphs, maybe it's beginning, end, or like the most important trend in the middle. There's just some stuff to figure out based on the prompt. But I recommend analyzing by the most important strategy by section, because that's just going to open up doors to higher levels of analysis. So that's why I push my students there. You don't have to do it that way, but you still have to talk about an important writing strategy. I think going by section is an effective way to organize your thoughts. When I say it opens up doors to analysis, what I mean is that you can say, hey, this is what the audience was thinking before the speech began. This is why the speaker had to address the audience from the get-go as he or she did. So you're just forcing yourself to get into the audience's head. What are they thinking? How is the author essentially meeting them where they are? Here's why I want you thinking about step 1. You don't have to analyze beginning, middle, and end, but I'm just emphasizing you have to analyze at a high level. Again, this is what I was just talking about. It encourages you to consider the why. No matter if you use my recommendation here or not, and not all my students do, and they're super effective if they don't. They just have to give me a rationale of like, based on the prompt, this is why I chose not to do it that way. Like you just have to have a reason for your organization, right? But you have to always be answering the why. So why is step 1 important? It's 1 sentence, it's your topic sentence. Topic sentences are crucial because they show you and your reader, they're making sure you're organized and you're ready to move on. If you just launch into it, oftentimes it's not so much like us as readers, like we can pick up what you're throwing down. We can understand where the high level analysis is occurring. The real problem here, and that's why I included it, is you. You are organizing your thoughts. You're finding the most important writing trend. So topic sentences are an effective component of effective writing. But the real problem comes with what's after oftentimes. If you don't have a strong topic sentence, your body paragraphs often fall apart. And I'm not meaning you, I mean like that's the trend that we see. So topic sentences are just securing yourself, making sure you're writing what's worth writing about. All right, step 2, clearly the most important step here because it's every sentence except for the first and the last. Step 2, as much as you can, not summary, analysis. Again, when I say analysis, getting into the audience's head, how is the author moving the audience? So explaining how the author's choices in this section works to achieve the overall purpose. And again, focusing on how the author anticipates the audience's thoughts and reactions. That before and after effect that I talked about earlier is super beneficial here. Let's move. I'm going to show you by the end of the night an example of what each of these steps looks like. Clearly, why this is important, I've said before, quality over quantity. This is the bulk of your body paragraphs. I've said it's the bulk of your time. This is where you truly earn your essay score. Introductions, I said last week, are icing on the cake. I started with them, even though obviously you got to make the cake before you ice it. I started with them last week just because it's the order of your essay. But this is where you spend your time. So there's tension I talked about with timing. I've coached some of my students who are not ready for introductions yet at this point in the year, like in terms of like what I talked about last week, to focus on the body paragraphs. Once those are going well and once we're getting up to speed, then we'll go ice the cake. We can't just eat icing, as nice as that would be. You've got to have a nice cake to go with it. This is where I want you to focus the majority of your energy. So really, when you're doing, in my timing, the first 12 minutes reading, you're thinking about your body paragraphs, right? You're thinking, what's the purpose? What am I going to talk about? What's the audience thinking? So clearly, you're only spending X amount of time writing. Well, as you're reading rhetorical analysis, you're reading with an analytical mind. what might I write about in my body paragraphs? That's the purpose of reading. And lastly, step 3. A lot of students get away from this too. I'm going to be transparent with you. This is the least important of the 3 steps, but I think it's an easy win, and it can just improve your organization, improve your scores. Focus on, in one sentence, how the part of the text you analyzed fits into the argument as a whole. Ineffective concluding statements simply restate the topic sentence, right, in different words. I want to push you to go beyond that. So again, I'll show you a model of that here in context. But again, focus on the argument as a whole. If I just say, like, well, let's just spitball here. I found a metaphor in line 3. That's my topic sentence, right? Here's what the metaphor means. Here's why the author used a metaphor. And then my concluding sentence would be, the metaphor made his argument or her argument more effective. Like, just very generic phrasing like that is ineffective. That's not where I want you to go. And I'm saying all of that because, honestly, that's the majority, at least more than half, of the rhetorical analysis essays I read every year at the AP Reading. So many students are just being vague and not really getting to the point of analysis. So that's why this is a super impactful and hopefully for you impactful and effective live session tonight, or replay if you're watching on a replay. Let's really lean into what effective analytical writing, finally, let's look at what it looks like. So remember, step 3, why is step 3 important? Again, I said this at the beginning, it affects and improves your organization. Anytime you can do that, that's a win. And honestly, and this is why, like, it's very easy, and this is what I was just talking about, to see where you're just doing it because you think you should do it, right? And sure, like, yeah, I know you're supposed to organize your essay, but then it's not clear to your reader, like, it looks like you're just checking a box. You're not actually, like, in full control of the analytical task. Step 2 here, or number 2 here, is why it's the most important. It actually improves your analysis, and I'll show you what that looks like here again in a minute. We're going to jump back into this one because last week I used Ronald Reagan's Space Shuttle address to the nation on the day of the Challenger explosion for my model intro. So I'm going to do the same one. So if you go back, you can see this would be my intro, and this would tonight be my first body paragraph. Literally, if the Space Shuttle Challenger address was the prompt, and the task was, what does Ronald Reagan do to effectively move his audience? That's essentially what every prompt is in different words. That last week I gave you what my introduction would be. This week I'm giving you my first body paragraph. We're going to quickly just think about what an analytical mind looks like. In the first section, again, so it's actually the same section as last time. And then just quickly, I want to spend most of our time not in his words again, but in my analysis of it, right? Just as a model of analysis. This is something to go back to and to look at, and really, none of this matters if you're not intentionally practicing this way. It doesn't have to be my organizational way. Totally can use it. But the point of it is spending a lot of time with high-level analytical thoughts. So again, if you've been with me, you've heard this before. The nation is in mourning. We just saw the Challenger explode on live TV. It was supposed to be the State of the Union address. Ronald Reagan obviously punted on that and just addressed what everyone needed to hear, his thoughts on the tragedy of the day. And also pointing out that astronauts at the time were American heroes. The time, remember, 1986. I'm going to just quickly go through this. We've done this before, but for anyone who's seeing this in isolation, I want you to have a little bit of sense of Reagan's speech before I just analyze it. I can't analyze it unless we remember where his words are coming from, right? So I'm just going to look at the first few sentences of his speech, and then I'm just going to analyze those. So Reagan says, "Ladies and gentlemen, I plan to speak to you tonight to report on the State of the Union. But the events of earlier today have led me to change those plans. Today is a day for mourning and remembering." All right, so again, he's emphasizing the magnitude of the day's events. He's meeting the audience where they are because they need to mourn. He's mourning with them. He cannot launch into anything else if he did not meet them where they were. So that's very much what I've been talking about tonight. That we're finally getting practical and tangible here in like 2 minutes. What would I actually write? That's what I'm thinking. Continues, Nancy and I are pained to the core by the tragedy of the shuttle Challenger. We know we share this pain with all of the people of our country. This is truly a national loss. So he's bringing in a human element. He's saying, I'm going through this. My wife is going through this. He's just connecting himself with his audience. Later on, he's going to push for the furtherment of space exploration in America. He might diverge with his audience then. Not everyone might agree with him. Right now, I think it's safe to assume everyone in his audience agrees with him here. This is a national loss, a national tragedy. All right, let's continue with Reagan. 19 years ago, almost to the day, we lost 3 astronauts in a terrible accident on the ground. But we've never lost an astronaut in flight. We've never had a tragedy like this. So here he's highlighting the uniqueness of the tragedy. He does that for twofold. Once to just emphasize like how much the mourning process needs to happen. But again, I just told you he's going to. So obviously we got to read it in context. We're not doing that tonight, but we would. We'll see the second half of the speech is saying we need to recommit to space exploration in America. By highlighting the uniqueness of the tragedy, he is also making sure his audience recognizes this isn't a common occurrence. We're not going to let this one uncommon thing, as tragic as it may be, stop us from our pursuing our goals. Let's continue. And perhaps we've forgotten the courage it took for the crew of the shuttle, but they, the Challenger 7, were aware of the dangers, but overcame them and did their jobs brilliantly. He's describing the astronauts as courageous heroes, clearly reinforcing the beliefs that the audience already has. And I'm not going to read this, but we mourn 7 heroes, 7 names. We mourn their loss as a national tragedy. This is, we mourn their loss as a nation together, I should say. He's slowing down. He's naming them. This is very common in times of mourning. We want to hear the names. That helps us process. That helps us make our mourning tangible. So he does that very intentionally there. He's personalizing. This is not just 7 heroes. It's 7 real people with real families and real names. Now, I'm going to pause with Reagan here and get into my analysis. But again, keeping in mind, my analysis here, the trend is he's joining his audience where they are. He's mourning with them. But I have to, and that's great. And if that's all I do, if that's all I talk about in my paragraph, I can certainly get that college credit. But the highest level writers are going to keep that in context. So I'm just telling you the context tonight. The context is he is going to shift where everyone agrees with him here. We need to mourn. This is terrible. But he shifts to, and we also need to recommit ourselves as a nation to space exploration. Not everyone's going to agree with him. So he's mourning with everyone, getting everyone aligned before he goes to a more controversial subject. Let's keep all of that in mind as we launch into step 1. Just a reminder, step 1 sentence, my topic sentence. I'm clearly stating the author's most important strategy in the first section of text, which is what we just read together. Here's where my topic sentence would be, or this is what it would actually say. Before he turns the nation's attention to the continued advancement of American space exploration, Reagan takes a moment at the beginning of the speech to mourn with the American public and the families of the astronauts who died. Let's talk about what I see and what I don't see. I do see Reagan. And you should know this, use the author's last name. You can just say Reagan, Reagan, Reagan. It's totally okay to repeat that. That's just analytical writing. You're going to do that. So I see his name. In every topic sentence, I will have the author's name. I see, and this first phrase or clause is what sets me apart, or this model apart, from most even effective writing, definitely ineffective writing. Again, I am putting it in the context of the work. Before he turns the nation's attention, blah, blah, blah. So I know that's where I'm going. Reagan takes a moment. And then the third thing that I see, and this is probably the most important step to include in your topic sentence, I'm clearly identifying what I'm about to analyze. What I don't see fancy terminology. You can, but I don't see it intentionally. I'm just calling it what it is. Now, it's not about terminology. Remember I said before, this is not a matching game. It's not, he juxtaposes X and Y. I love that phrase. I'm not saying not use it, but I'm just saying that's not the priority. That's not the goal. Because when you think that labeling terminology is the goal, you often stop at the goal. That's what I found. Students often stop at the goal, so let's just make sure the goal is where it's supposed to be. The goal is to analyze at a high level, how is Reagan getting in the audience's head, and then maneuvering them on his side, or like at least intending to or trying to. All right, again, step one, let's just focus on this for a bit. Keeps the writing choice in the context of the work as a whole, clearly identifies the writing trend, keeps the audience at the forefront. Step two, the most important step. So we're going to take several minutes here and really unpack this. I will show you what my analysis would be if I was writing in a 40-minute time setting. Thoroughly explain how the author's choices in the section. Again, we're just talking about section one, or I call it section one, but like the beginning of his speech. How it works to achieve the overall purpose. And focus on how the author anticipates the audience's thoughts and emotions. I'm going to break this into a couple of slides just so we can talk about them in a little bit more detail. This would be the second sentence of my body paragraph. Knowing that the television audience was in shock after witnessing the tragic explosion earlier in the day, Reagan directly addresses their emotions at the beginning of a speech, acknowledging that today is a day for mourning and remembering. I'm going to talk about writing style next week, so quick preview of that. When I say embedding quotes, this is what I'm talking about. I'm going to unpack this with many more examples next week to really get to higher level writing. So I'm modeling that for you tonight. That's just not our focus tonight. So let's focus on content. In that first sentence of step two, I'm keeping the audience at the forefront. If I just launch into Reagan directly addresses their emotions, I'm still actually thinking of the audience, right? Because it's their emotions. But broadening out that with that first, knowing that the television audience, it's just making sure, and you're communicating to your reader, I know the analytical task, I'm getting the audience's head. Let's look at my second sentence of analysis. During Reagan's opening remarks, the American audience was not emotionally ready to think about what lies ahead. Please remember, I'm keeping the whole work as a whole in mind. Because what does he do? Eventually, he's looking at what's ahead. So that's why that sentence is there. A lot of students, I'd say the vast majority of students, would not include that sentence. So if you can include a sentence like that, of like fitting in your analysis with the work as a whole, that's what I'm doing. That's going to certainly set you apart. So many students would just say, here's my quote, today is a day for mourning and remembering, and then just say, this would elicit X emotion, or this would use pathos, right? This is how to do it at a much higher level. My third sentence says, instead, they needed to take time to mourn the loss of their heroes. My first three sentences have the word audience in them, with the exception of sentence 3, which says they in place of audience, right? So my first three sentences, every sentence of my analysis is about the audience, not about Reagan and his strategy, about Reagan and his strategy because of the audience. So the audience is the component that actually is driving my essay here. All right, keep going. This is exactly what Reagan does in the third paragraph of his speech. Pause if you're with me. Instead, they needed to take time to mourn the loss of their heroes. This is exactly what Reagan does in the third paragraph of his speech. So I'm targeting a little bit more specifically here. Sandwiched between the phrase "we mourn," Reagan forces his audience to slow down and think of nothing but the astronauts, listing them by name. Please hear me on the tension of summary and analysis. This is not summary, this is analysis. Because, again, I skipped a short little sentence here, like a transition sentence in my writing, but the next sentence of analysis really has the word audience in it again, right? The reason why, side note, the reason why I say audience, audience, audience is because it's such a broad audience. It's the American public. If it's more nuanced, I'll address that in my writing. So, and I could do here American audience or Americans. That's totally valid. But hear me correctly tonight. Audience, audience, audience. And again, look at my preview for next week. How many words have I quoted on this slide, which is the bulk of my body paragraph? 2 words. It's not about quoting, although I did it, so do it, but it's about what you do with the quote. I'm spending the majority of my very limited time analyzing. Analyzing is talking about his audience and the impact his words would have on them. So let's look at how I end my analysis. By doing this, Reagan is not only giving his audience permission to mourn, he is forcing them to do so, knowing that once they take time to mourn, they will be emotionally able to process the rest of his speech. Look at how beautiful that is. I'm not just saying this is the emotion of the audience. I am talking about he's meeting the audience where they are, and he's prepping his audience for the harder part of his speech or the more controversial part of his speech. He's prepping them for what to come. They are not emotionally available to hear anything they don't want to hear until they've taken time to mourn. That is what I want you focusing on. Why is he talking to his audience at the beginning, middle, and end? Intentionally. If he did this at the end, it's too little too late, I think. If he were to start his speech saying, hey, we're going to recommit to space exploration, they wouldn't be ready to hear it, right? So it's too little too late. So he's intentionally saying, we need to mourn together, everybody. And then he'll shift to the harder parts. That's my analytical thought. Here's me translating it into writing. So wrap up points on step 2, the most important step. The analysis is concerned with the most important writing choices, and the audience is kept at the forefront. And hopefully you clearly saw that tonight. Lastly, let's not rush and just move on to my next beautiful body paragraph. Take a second, conclude. Remember I said I'll show you how to make sure this works in as part of the whole, right? So it's not just, here, let's go back real quick. It's not simply restating this in different words, my topic sentence. Let's see what to do. Although the nation's mourning is nowhere near complete, Reagan has primed the public to accept his challenge that the space program's work must continue. Again, I did not use one fancy word, fancy AP terminology in this entire paragraph. And I promise you, this is a beautiful paragraph. Your AP reader would be so excited to finally get someone who gets the analytical test, because so many people are doing the matching game. And the reason why, that's the first reason why this is set apart. The second is because of the just over and over and over emphasis on audience. And what really sets it apart is sentences like these, putting it in the context of the entire speech. So my next body paragraph would be about where I'm leading here. Reagan has primed the public to accept his challenge that the space program's work must continue. I hope that you can see how these pieces can start to fit together. Please always feel free to reach out to me with any clarification or honestly, if I'm kind of approaching Fiveable as this is like the most important parts of AP. Like if you can only do 1 hour a week, this is what I would do. But if there's something like, hey, I really need help with this, or can you clarify this even more, please reach out to me, let me know. Questions as well in the live session would be great. So with all of that said, why step 3 is effective? It's keeping the audience at the forefront still, and it's considering how my analysis fits into the work as a whole. So many essays that I read have 2 or 3 body paragraphs that are just in isolation. Here's the strategy, here's the strategy, here's the strategy, but there's no talk about how the 3 or 2 strategies work together as a whole. That's what's going to truly set you apart. Now, I'm not going to read this whole body paragraph to you, but this is what it looks like. Now, this is typed up. Clearly, this is a pretty dang long body paragraph. Keep that in mind. That's why I say, hey, 2 body paragraphs is fine. And again, this is just my organizational structure. There's other ways to achieve the same goals, But the goal is, let's be very straight about it. Keep the audience up front, analyze what's worth talking about, put your analysis in context of the entire speech. So I've got my topic sentence, I've got most of this is my analysis, and I've got my beautiful wrap-up sentence that launches me into my next body paragraph. That's very, very intentional. Now, let's just pause on this slide. I have 2 different quotes. They're super embedded. That's what we're going to look at next week. Why I chose to work on, when I work on with you next week writing style, I'm working on that one because, or I'm working on embedding quotes for writing style right now, because that's freeing up so much of your writing with giving you the opportunity to just analyze. Look at how big this body paragraph is and how little quoting I'm doing. That opens me up to talk about audience, talk about how Reagan's moving his audience. So please note that tonight. So I just highlighted the quotes here. Literally, if we count the words I quoted, today is a day for mourning and remembering. We mourn. 10 words. That's all I quoted. I read so many papers that are simply, here's my topic sentence. So I'm going to talk about juxtaposition or metaphor. And then here's a quote. And so many students copy down like 20, 30 words per quote. And then you just don't have much time to analyze those thoroughly, right? And you're giving up control of being the writer. When I'm quoting Reagan, I'm giving him the floor for a minute. I'm taking the floor back and analyzing it. I'm only giving him the floor 10 different words wise, right? In this paragraph alone. That frees me up to be super in charge of my own analysis. Now let's look at what I really care about. I did not highlight in red here my concluding sentence, my topic sentence, although they're very effective. I did not quote, I did not highlight my quotes or like the introductory phrases of those, but I highlighted in red every single sentence that's giving me analytical points, right? Like that's clearly showing your reader I'm analyzing. I get the writing task. And then obviously what's in red, the quality needs to be there. But look at the quantity. The majority of my body paragraph is analysis. I make my students do this. Highlight in blue what's quoted, highlight in red, or whatever colors, right? Highlight in red what's actually analysis. It's amazing if you look at that. So many paragraphs like seem, okay, student knows what to do, but half of it's quoting. So this is freeing you up to make sure you're really doing what's right. So take a test of your own. Maybe go back and look at your most recent analysis essay you've done. How much is truly analysis? How much are you just giving the floor back up to the writer? It's a very common problem. All right, we're going to wrap up tonight. Again, please reach out for any clarification or questions. But 1, it's all about the audience. I hope that was made very clear tonight. That was my #1 goal. 2, we've talked about this in the past, but it's so important. Write about what's worth writing about. You did not see a single fancy term from me. Fancy terms are not bad. They're just not the goal. And then 3rd, quality over quantity. 2 body paragraphs are fine if they look like this. 3 body paragraphs, if they don't look like this, maybe not getting the job done like you want it to. Quality, when I say quality, I'm talking about everything in red right here. Quality is my analysis with the audience in mind. How is Reagan entering the audience's head, meeting them where they are, and then moving the needle? All right, so stay connected, everybody. We are going to continue to do live streams every Tuesday night. We've got one more in our unit on rhetorical analysis, and then we will be launching into argumentation. So I hope this is helpful. I hope this is something you can continue to go back to and really looking at this is what the bar is. And then obviously as the year is working on, you are working on meeting the bar in the time constraints, and that's what's so hard. So until then, I will sign out for tonight, but please reach out again if there are any pieces of this that as you're working through it, you would like more feedback on or more models, whatever is most valuable for you. This is all for you. And one final reminder, if you're not a member currently, become a member. I really encourage it today or tomorrow because prices are going up for membership November 1st. All right, everybody, have a great rest of the week. Thank you.